Jesus rode into Jerusalem on a donkey. Can you imagine that? A king riding on a donkey. People shouted and cheered. They waved palm branches and laid down their coats in front of him. They were so happy to see Jesus. He had healed their sick and told them wonderful stories. They believed he was the promised king, the one who would make everything right again. "Hosanna!" they cried. "Blessed is he who comes in the name of the Lord." Everyone loved Jesus. Well, almost everyone. In the bustling city where crowds gathered to listen to Jesus, not everyone was pleased with what they saw. Among the people there were leaders, men who wore fine robes and carried themselves with great importance. These leaders had always been respected, and they were used to being the ones everyone listened to. But now something was changing and they could feel it. The people were turning their attention to Jesus, and the leaders were not happy about it. They watched Jesus closely, their faces tight with disapproval. They didn't like the way he spoke about God's love, especially when he said that love was for everyone, even for people the leaders thought were unworthy. Jesus welcomed tax collectors, sinners, and people who had made mistakes. He treated them with kindness and respect, and this made the leaders uncomfortable. They believed that only certain people deserved God's favor, and they didn't want to share their power or their place in the community. As the crowds grew larger, the leaders became more and more jealous. They saw how people flocked to Jesus, hanging on his every word, and they felt their own influence slipping away. The admiration and love that once belonged to them was now being given to someone else. It stung their pride, and they couldn't hide their envy. "This is no king," they grumbled among themselves, their voices low but filled with anger. They whispered in corners, shaking their heads and muttering about how Jesus was leading the people astray. They couldn't understand why so many followed him, and it made them even more determined to stop him. The leaders gathered together, pointing fingers and raising their voices in heated discussions. They argued about what should be done, each one wanting to be the one in charge. They didn't want to lose their authority, and they certainly didn't want Jesus to take their place. Their hearts were filled with fear and pride, and they began to plot against him. In secret meetings, they whispered their plans. They worried about what might happen if Jesus continued to gain followers. They feared losing everything they had worked for, their power, their respect, and their comfortable lives. So they decided they needed to get rid of him, no matter what it took. But while the leaders plotted, Jesus kept doing what he had always done. He taught the people about love, forgiveness, and hope. He healed the sick, comforted the lonely, and welcomed everyone who came to him. No matter how much the leaders tried to stop him, Jesus continued to show compassion to all. Jesus loved the people deeply, even those who didn't love him back. He reached out to those who were ignored or rejected by others. He showed kindness to people who had never known kindness before. His love was so great that it included everyone, even the leaders who were plotting against him. Jesus knew what was coming. He could see the anger in the leaders' eyes and hear the whispers of their plans. But he wasn't afraid. He faced their hostility with calm and courage, knowing that his mission was more important than his own safety. Jesus had come to do something wonderful, something no one else could do. He came to show the world what true love looks like, even in the face of jealousy, anger, and fear. And no matter what the leaders did, nothing could stop him from fulfilling his purpose. One night, Jesus had a special supper with his friends. They ate bread and drank wine together. Jesus told them he loved them very much. He told them he would have to leave them soon, but that he would come back again. "This bread is my body broken for you," Jesus said. "This wine is my blood poured out for you. Do this in remembrance of me." Jesus was giving them a special way to remember him, even when he was gone. He was giving them a gift of love and forgiveness. Later that night, after sharing a final meal with his closest friends, Jesus quietly left the bustling city behind. He walked with his disciples through the silent streets, the only sounds their footsteps and the distant hum of Jerusalem settling into sleep. The air was cool and the moon hung high above, casting gentle silver light over the path as they made their way to a familiar place, a garden called Gethsemane, nestled at the foot of the Mount of Olives. This was a place Jesus often visited to pray and find peace away from the crowds. As they entered the garden, Jesus asked his friends to sit and keep watch while he went a little farther to pray alone. He knew deep in his heart what was about to unfold. The weight of what was coming pressed heavily on him, and he felt a sorrow so deep that it almost overwhelmed him. He knelt among the olive trees, his hands clasped, and poured out his heart in prayer, seeking strength for the difficult path ahead. In the stillness of the night, Jesus could sense the approach of danger. He knew the leaders who opposed him were plotting, and that soon soldiers would come to arrest him. The flicker of distant torches began to appear between the trees, growing brighter as they drew closer. The quiet of the garden was about to be shattered. Even though sadness filled his heart, Jesus did not feel anger or bitterness. He understood that this was the moment he had been preparing for all along. He prayed for his friends, for those who would hurt him, and for the courage to face what was coming. Despite the fear and sorrow, a deep peace settled over him, knowing he was fulfilling his purpose. Jesus stood up, resolved and ready. He had come to show love, forgiveness and hope, and he was determined to see it through, no matter the cost. He returned to his friends, finding them weary and struggling to stay awake, and gently encouraged them to pray for strength as well. Suddenly, the quiet was broken by the sound of footsteps and the glow of torches weaving through the darkness. The garden, once a place of peace, was now filled with tension and fear as the soldiers arrived, their faces stern and determined. The soldiers, sent by the jealous leaders who felt threatened by Jesus' teachings, marched into the garden. They were led by someone who had once been close to Jesus, but who had chosen to betray him. The disciples watched in shock and disbelief as the soldiers surrounded their teacher. Without resistance, Jesus allowed himself to be arrested. He did not fight back or try to escape, even though he had done nothing wrong. His friends, terrified and confused, watched as the soldiers bound his hands and led him away into the night. Some wanted to defend him, but Jesus stopped them, reminding them that violence was not the answer. The disciples were filled with fear and uncertainty. They huddled together, their hearts pounding, unable to understand why this was happening. Everything seemed to be falling apart, and they felt lost and alone in the darkness. But even as he was being taken away, Jesus turned to comfort his friends. He told them not to be afraid, assuring them that they would never be truly alone. He promised that, no matter what happened, his love and presence would remain with them, giving them hope and strength. The garden, now empty and silent under the moonlight, held the memory of that night, a night of sorrow, courage and love. Though his friends could no longer see him, Jesus' promise remained. He would always be with them, guiding and comforting them, even in the darkest moments. The leaders put Jesus on trial. They asked him lots of questions, trying to trick him into saying something wrong. But Jesus always told the truth, even when it was hard. People told lies about Jesus, saying he was trying to be king and that he didn't love God. But Jesus stayed quiet. He knew the truth would come out in the end. Even though the leaders couldn't find anything wrong with Jesus, they decided to punish him anyway. They were afraid of him and the love people had for him. The soldiers made fun of Jesus. They put a crown of thorns on his head and a purple robe on his back, pretending he was a king. They hit him and spat on him, but Jesus didn't fight back. He just kept loving them, even though they were hurting him. He loved them so much that he was willing to suffer for them, to take away all the bad things they had done. On Good Friday, something extraordinary and heartbreaking happened. Early in the morning, after a long night of trials and suffering, Jesus was forced to carry a heavy wooden cross through the crowded streets of Jerusalem. The cross was rough and splintered, and it dug painfully into his shoulders with every step he took. The people lining the streets watched in silence, some with tears in their eyes, others mocking or shouting. Roman soldiers marched alongside, making sure he did not stop or rest. Each step was a struggle, and the journey felt endless. Jesus was already exhausted from the beatings and the long night without sleep. His body was bruised and bleeding, and every muscle ached. Yet even as he stumbled and fell, he found the strength to get up and keep going. Some people in the crowd felt deep sorrow for him, while others turned away, unable to watch his suffering. Despite the pain and humiliation, Jesus did not complain or fight back. He kept moving forward, step by step, carrying the burden that was placed upon him. Finally, they reached a place called Calvary, a hill just outside the city. There, the soldiers laid Jesus on the cross and drove heavy nails through his hands and feet. The sound of the hammer echoed across the hill, and the pain was unimaginable. They lifted the cross and set it upright between two others, leaving Jesus to hang in the hot sun. The crowd watched in silence, some weeping, others still jeering. It was a moment of deep sorrow and cruelty. The pain Jesus felt was more than just physical. He saw his mother and friends crying at the foot of the cross, their hearts breaking as they watched him suffer. The sky seemed to grow darker and a heavy silence fell over the land. It was a terrible, painful way to die, and everyone there could feel the weight of the moment. As Jesus hung on the cross, struggling to breathe, he looked up to heaven and prayed for the very people who had hurt him. He cried out, "Father, forgive them, for they do not know what they are doing." Even in his agony, Jesus showed compassion and mercy. He did not hold anger or hatred in his heart. Instead, he offered forgiveness to everyone, even those who had nailed him to the cross. Jesus' love was so great that it reached out to everyone, even to the criminals crucified beside him and the soldiers who carried out the execution. He spoke words of hope and forgiveness, promising paradise to the thief who believed in him. His kindness touched the hearts of many, and even some of the soldiers began to realize that something extraordinary was happening. As the hours passed, Jesus' strength faded. He forgave everyone, even though they didn't deserve it. With his final breath, he entrusted his spirit to God and died. The world seemed to stop in that moment. His friends and family stood in shock and sorrow, unable to believe that he was gone. The loss was overwhelming and the pain was deep. It was a sad day, the saddest day ever. The people who loved Jesus felt lost and alone. They could not understand why such a good and loving person had to suffer and die. The world seemed darker, and hope felt far away. Tears flowed freely and hearts were heavy with grief. As Jesus died, the sky grew dark and the earth shook. It was as if all of creation was mourning with the people. The temple curtain tore in two, and many were filled with fear and awe. The world seemed to hold its breath, sensing that something powerful and mysterious had just taken place. But even in the deepest darkness, God's love was still present. The story of Good Friday is not just about suffering and loss. It is also about love, forgiveness, and hope. Even when everything seemed lost, God's love remained, shining like a light in the darkness, promising that this was not the end of the story. On the third day, something amazing happened. Some of Jesus' friends went to the tomb where they had laid his body. But when they got there, the tomb was empty. "He is not here," an angel said. "He has risen just as he said." Jesus was alive. He had defeated death. Jesus appeared to his friends. They were so happy to see him. He was alive again, and everything was going to be okay. Jesus had kept his promise. Jesus' love had won. He had taken away all the bad things in the world, all the sadness and pain. He had opened the way for us to be with God forever. Because of Jesus, we can have hope, even when things are hard. We can know that God is always with us, and that one day everything will be made right again.